They asked me to be there at 8:30. They chose the hour the plates would be cleared, the wine glasses polished, the kitchen quiet. They wanted me to walk into a room that had already stopped being a dinner and had become a performance, with me cast as the final, predictable prop, the one who would pay for everyone's laughter. The door breathed cool night air when I stepped inside. I felt the jacaranda trees through the window, their purple like a memory. My sweater smelled faintly of the garlic butter from the sidewalk stall I'd stopped at because I was running a little late. My leather purse, garnet, soft from years of being opened and closed, was under my arm. 9 faces lifted, plates already empty. A folder of paper sat where the food should have been, a thick bill, the kind restaurants put in a leather folder when they expect tears or excuses. "You're late," Valeria said with a smile so practiced it could have been made in a factory. "You pay." A laugh from somewhere, a brittle, expectant sound. Sebastian's mouth was a thin line. I felt the room tilt, a tiny, nauseous spin like stepping on a loose stone. Humiliation is a physical thing. It lives in the throat, a hot pebble that won't go down. The waiter closed the folder so the number stayed secret, but the gesture was the same as showing a jagged coin. Pay up. Be grateful. I set the folder down on the table and did what I always do when a pain is too sudden. I steadied myself. My hands remembered the weight of salad servers, the heft of grocery cans, the patient pull of a child's jacket when crossing a street. I had lifted heavier things than a bill, but that didn't make the shame evaporate. Shame has a way of taking the small, private things, a laugh I used to make at my husband Arnulfo's jokes, the way I kept my garden neat, and pressing them into evidence that I had somehow failed. "Excuse me," I said. My voice held itself like class. "Marco?" He came without being called. Marco, the manager, a tall man with an air of someone who has learned to read the room and choose which fires to put out. He recognized me the same way a tree recognizes the rain, an old habit, familiar and settling. Marco and I had done business before. He'd walked my nephew through a job reference once, and had always treated me with that quiet respect you get from people who know you're not a fool. When I asked him what was happening, he looked at the bill, then at Valeria, then back at me. Someone here had expected a scene. They'd bought it and wrapped it in laughter. "Miss Reyes," he said, and his voice was careful gold. "This table, there's been a mistake." Valeria's smile tightened. "The mistake is you're late. That's the cost." I felt the urge to apologize, to smooth over the moment as women are trained to do, to throw a napkin over the shame like a hand over a spill.
But there is a line between graciousness and erasure, and I have learned to stand on the line without stepping back into being invisible. I didn't reach for my purse. If you are watching and you know what it feels like to have a room judge you because someone else planned the moment, if you know how small your neck goes in a second, stay with me. If you want to see how humiliation changed into something else for me, subscribe and follow my story. Stay until the end. I said Marco's name because he knew me. He was the reason the waiter had not yet opened the folder. I called him and told him simply that I would not be paying that bill. I told him to look at the records, to remember that I had been in more rooms in that restaurant than any of them had, that I had sat through birthdays and anniversaries, that I'd introduced friends to the chef. It was not a long speech. It was a rope thrown across a river. Either he takes it or he doesn't. He took it. He folded his napkin like some priests do with their hands, a small ritual of authority, and he walked the long way around the table to my side. He slid the folder back toward Valeria and said softly, "This is not how we treat our guests. There are ways to be humiliated that are private, and there are ways that are made public. This one was meant for the second. They designed it to be performative. The look of me opening my wallet, the click of a credit card terminal, the cooing satisfaction of an audience who believes they're watching justice in the form of a check. They miscalculated me, the way a cook misjudges the amount of salt. They thought it would sting and then be over. Marco's intervention stopped the immediate performance, but the thing they had tried to do, to make me the punchline, did not simply disappear. It settled into a warmer, longer burn, the memory of 9 faces, and the ledger I carried in my head, the little notebook I always kept in my dresser drawer, with its dates and numbers written in a hand that had learned to count for a family. After I left the restaurant that night, I walked under the jacarandas and felt like peeling sin. Old habits are stubborn. I had a notebook at home, garnet-colored, with a clasp that no longer stayed closed properly. It had begun as a place to write grocery lists and recipes and the odd poem. And as life became more complicated, it became a ledger. I began writing down things people asked for and promised, the small debts asked in a voice like a joke, and the big ones asked under the shape of a wedding invitation. I had been married to Arnulfo for 42 years. We built a house, not because we were wealthy, we weren't, but because we were steady. Arnulfo taught me how to fix a leaky faucet and how to make coffee strong.
He taught me the small economies of a life, how to buy tomatoes in season, how to mend a sweater so the elbow would not show.
When he died, something heavy and patient died with him, the quiet insurance of a partner. I learned to walk differently, to carry the house's weight alone. I learned to fold money in a way that made its edges last longer. My son, Sebastian, was everything to me. Powerful word, son. He was stubborn the way sons are, and generous in ways that made me proud. When he told me he'd found someone he loved, my heart did what it had always done. It expanded and folded in on itself at once. Valeria came in with a smile that could strike matchsticks into flame. She was young, quick with compliments, and she had an enthusiasm that I envied in a younger person. She hugged me at first like someone who had been given a get-out-of-shame-free card just for being pretty. Early on, there were small tremors. She called me suegrita, an almost affectionate word in Spanish that has the texture of teasing. Sometimes she said it like a note, sometimes like a knife. It was the way she would knead the conversation until my opinions looked old-fashioned. "You shouldn't worry about such things, Mama," she'd say, smoothing a tablecloth I had just set. "Let us handle it." There is a kindness that liberates and a kindness that takes. She wielded the latter with the easy grace of someone who has practiced getting the upper hand. The wedding was a turning point masked as celebration. They wanted a thing that dazzled, a honeymoon that stretched into weeks, a band, a venue with crystal chandeliers I'd only seen in magazines. I paid for more than I had planned. I told myself it was for love and for Sebastian's happiness. When you are a mother, sometimes your own bank of sacrifices feels like the only currency that will buy your child's joy. It felt good to see him laughing, to see him start an adult life in a home that had echoes of our dinner table. But kindness, when untended, can become permission. The wedding was what opened the door to the months that followed. It was not one grand theft. It was a slow erosion, like water under a stone. Little loans became habit. "Can you lend me this?" was the first line. "We'll pay you back next month," was the next. The next month they would say, "We forgot," or "It's been so expensive," or "We'll put it back as soon as we can." And I would say yes, because love is sometimes the reflex to help without counting the cost. I started writing it all down because memory lies. Memory wants to smooth jagged edges. It wants to leave out the small humiliations and keep the grand gestures. I wanted the truth in ink. I wanted a stubborn, honest record of numbers. On my first page there were small entries: 10,000 pesos for a dress, 25,000 for a last-minute plane ticket, 15,000 here to help with a deposit. I wrote dates, names, short notes: wedding, half paid, honeymoon taxi, apartment deposit.
The numbers seemed innocent as I wrote them, the way a doctor might write tiny prescriptions, nothing that would alarm at the moment. But they added up. They grow like mold if you do not check on them, invisible until a neighbor points and a whole patch has taken over the wall. I never wanted to feel like a bank, but I had been that too, the place where needs go to be satisfied. I would sign a slip and feel the weight of the ink as if it were a small hand on my shoulder. The more I smiled and said yes, the less I recognized the person in my own mirror. They moved into my house little by little. First a few boxes during a weekend break, then a couch, just for now, then the master bedroom because their apartment had a leak. I told myself I was being generous. Generosity is honorable, but so is space. The house shifted around me like a tide. Family photographs were rearranged. Old chairs were moved to corners and replaced by newer things that fit Valeria's style: sleek, glossy, new. The little rituals of my life, a vase of bread flowers on the table, a bowl of lime for the bathroom, were swallowed by someone else's aesthetic. I learned that invasion does not always come with a shout. Sometimes it comes with a polite, correct mutter. "This would look better over here, Mama." There were words they used that made me small. "You don't need to worry about money. Leave it to us." Those words sound like rest, like liberation, but when the person who says them is the one who ends up writing the checks and moving the furniture, it becomes a set of chains that shine and look like help. I am not trying to be tragic. I am trying to be honest. There is dignity in truth, in admitting you were seduced by love and by the habit of giving, even when the giving was not returned. There is power, too, in measuring the cost. I learned to count. I added the columns in my notebook like a small accountant, a line for date, a description, the amount. Some entries were crisp and bare. Rent arrears, 12/20/18, 40,000.
Others were tender with excuses. Car repair, 0219, 8500, will pay next month. There were times when I paused and put the pen down because the sum felt impossible. I would sit with the paper and think that any good person might do what I did if placed in front of a child's request. But there is a difference between being generous and being used. That difference is the line I am learning to trace now like a border around my life. As the months went on, the numbers multiplied into something stark. 697,000 pesos. I read it 3 times before the brain allowed me to feel any particular emotion. 697,000. My hand shook as if I had lifted a kettle. It was more than a sum. It was a ledger of small humiliations, of nights I had not slept worrying how to cover another grocery bill because they needed a deposit for an apartment. It was the cost of love that had been taken as leverage.
The bank statements confirmed things that my notebook had hinted at. There was an account with about 340,000 pesos saved, money I'd put away because an old woman needs a cushion, because medical bills exist and bones grow weary. And there were transfers that made me blink and reread each month's line until the letters blurred. Not all of it was gone. Some of it remained, quiet as a stone, but some of it moved in ways that made me hold my breath. Small withdrawals, transfers labeled vaguely, numbers that looked like they were doing a dance I did not recognize. I was not brave in the way a soldier is brave. My courage is a domestic sort, the kind that comes from pulling blankets close and stepping out the next morning. I called my lawyer, Licenciada Patricia Mendoza, a woman with a forehead that holds storms, and told her the gist of it. I think they have been taking advantage. She listened with the professional calm of a person who has seen greed made polite. You have to document everything, she said. Receipts, messages, bank statements. Keep that record. We will need it. I felt oddly relieved. Documentation felt like a recipe. If I followed it, perhaps I could make something hold together. The problem with humiliation is not only the immediate burn, it is the fear that it will be repeated because no one saw it. Papers, I learned, are a way to make the world see. I hired Rodrigo, a private detective who had been a police officer once. He was the sort of man who knows how to fold words into reports and make them feel like steel. Rodrigo's first visit was practical. He moved quietly through the house like a guest who knows how to detect incense. He took photographs and asked a sort of question that didn't give people time to practice lying. Do you have messages? He asked. Do you have receipts? He knew the right balance between sympathy and action. There is a skill to listening that feels like a half press of a button. It readies the person you're listening to. He left me with a promise. I will look, he said. I will look at accounts, at cards, at purchases. I'll follow paper. Paper doesn't like to disappear. I kept writing. I kept the notebook close to my heart, and sometimes I held it like a child who was afraid of thunder. The account of $697,000 was not only numbers now. It was names and times. The ferry of a honeymoon, the new couch, the deposits, the dinners when I thought I was offering love. It was the wedding day when I signed a check with hands that trembled for an indifferent future. It was the months when Sebastian called less, when he would look at me and I could see the crease in his brow as if he carried 2 calendars, one with his wife and another with his mother. There were messages too. Not many were poetic. Mostly they were utility, sometimes short apologies. I'll send it tomorrow. We had an emergency. Things are tight.
There were others that made me feel smaller. Jokes about my frugality in the presence of friends, little mineralized barbs that pricked the skin like mosquito bites. Someone would say something casual, and the room would tilt another degree. There were moments I wanted to confront them in the kitchen, to stand there in my house and say, "This is mine. These walls know my footsteps." But confrontation without a plan is like bringing a spoon to a sword fight. I am not a vindictive woman. I am a practical one who has learned that if you want to win certain fights, you must gather the right tools. Rodrigo called after a week. He had photographs, credit card receipts for expensive boutiques, a series of hotel bills, a booking in a neighborhood of the city that smelled like marble and expensive cologne. They have planned things, he said. There are patterns. There's even a small document, a plan, something with a title. A plan? I echoed, because when you are suspicious, you hope for nothing and then fear everything. Yes, Rodrigo said. It looks like notes, names, steps. It's small. They kept it in a drawer. I have always had a private fear that the people closest to me might have a map I had not been given. For months I felt like there had been a blueprint for taking what belonged to me, for moving into my house in stages, for making the small things look casual so the large thing could arrive without knocking. If someone had written a plan to take my home, I would like to see the script they had been following. When Rodrigo handed me the folder a few days later, my hands shook in a way that was no longer only about age or illness. The cover said nothing. It could have been recipes. It could have been a grocery list. I opened it like someone reading a letter from a stranger who has stolen your childhood toys. At the top was a typed title, Plan Casa Polanco. There is a horrible clarity that comes with reading a document someone has written about you, as if you are suddenly the subject of a novel you didn't choose to be in. The paper outlined a sequence of steps. The words were not grand, they were practical and businesslike. They described schedules and roles and something that looked eerily like a timeline. It was written with the same cool tone you use when you speak of paint colors or tile choices. It called the house a project. It listed expenditures like a shopping list. It made my life look like a ledger someone else was balancing. My heart shifted in the middle of the living room. For a moment, I felt like the house itself was holding its breath. The portraits on the wall, the curtain I had sewn, the small table with the vase of marigolds, all of it had been entered into someone else's ledger as if it were real estate in a plan to be repurposed. "You wanted to see," Rodrigo said. His voice was careful, a man who has walked across mines and knows which are safe. "I can get more. There are receipts. There are messages."
They were not sloppy, but they weren't careful enough. People who craft a plan like this sometimes leave a string. The string was there. A bank transfer with no explanation. A hotel receipt for the exact date a promise said, "I will pay you back." A note in Valeria's handwriting. Casa. Final step. That last phrase, short and businesslike, landed in my chest like a stone. I could have been angry. I could have cried so loudly that the street would have come. Instead, I felt a strange clarity. The feeling was not purely righteous. It tasted like iron and bakery bread, real, awkward, ordinary. There is a moment in a house after a storm where the window's clear and you can see the like is different. I had that moment now. They had tried to turn my shame into spectacle at a restaurant, but they had also taken steps that left a paper trail. Paper had become my ally. I laid the plan on the table and looked at each line. For the first time in months, I felt the shape of a way forward. It did not require a shout. It required patience and the same kind of small, steady work that had built my savings and my garden. It required that I be meticulous and unromantic about the truth. I called my lawyer. I called Rodrigo. I made a list of things to do next. Photographic evidence, copies of bank statements, access to emails and messages. I would not be the woman in the folder any longer. I would be a woman with receipts. That night I slept poorly, thinking of the restaurant's leather folder and the way people had laughed. I thought of my notebook and how it had saved itself in a small pocket of my life. I thought of Arnolfo and the way he used to whistle when he fixed things. I thought of Sebastian and how his face had changed the way a photograph fades when left in the sun. In the morning, I sat with the garnet notebook and began to write again, more clearly now, as if I were engraving a map. The entries were not just numbers. They were moments recorded with a steady hand. The notebook would be my voice if I lost mine under the weight of other people's announcements. I invited Marco to come by my house the following week. I did not yet know how the restaurant scene would fold into the plan. I only knew that I did not want a dinner to be the place that decided the fate of my dignity. I wanted a strategy that used the momentum of truth and paper, not the chaos of a staged humiliation. When Marco arrived, he walked into my living room and looked at the Plan Casa Polanco spread across my table. He did not laugh. He did not make the small jokes people make when faced with the absurdity of others. He sat and put his palm flat on the paper as if to weigh it. "We'll help however you need," he said. I found in that sentence a kind of mercy. Allies appear in odd places. Sometimes they are managers who remember service and loyalty. Sometimes they are friends who know how to process outrage without turning it into spectacle.
Sometimes they are private detectives with a past that taught them to read men and women by the way they sign their names. We began to plan in the ways practical people do, not with fire or threats, but with steps. Collect evidence, confront with witnesses, bring legal pressure. We would not humiliate them in return. That would be childish and ruinous. We would give them something better, exposure with consequences. We would insist on the dignity of paperwork, the slow grind of a legal demand. The revenge, I imagined, was not violent. It was civilized,
and therefore terrible in a way the other side would not understand. It was the stripping away of their comfortable assumptions by the light of proof. But even the most careful plans begin with a single action, and the action I had to take first would feel small. I had to walk back into a room that smelled of garlic and waiter's polish. I had to sit beneath chandeliers and look at faces that had practiced their surprise. I had to keep my voice steady and my papers ready. The folder on the table was not the end of the story. It was evidence that a story existed. I closed the garnet notebook, my ledger of betrayals and kindnesses, and tucked it into the inner drawer where I kept the old photographs. I did not lock it. Locks are theatrical. Trust is built on the placement of things and the knowledge that someone will find them when it matters. The next steps felt both enormous and reasonable. I would gather people who would stand with me. I would let the law do its quiet, patient work. I would not let them reduce me to the punchline of a well-planned evening. When I look back at that time, the humiliation in the restaurant is a keyhole. It shows only a sliver of what had been happening for months, but the sliver reflects enough light to outline the shape of what I needed to do: measure, document, and prepare to reclaim not only money, but the home we had built together. I had no idea how the rest of the plan would unfold. I only knew the next move: to follow the paper where it led. We set the date for the dinner like two generals arranging a truce. Not because I wanted peace, I wanted the truth laid out on a table where everyone could see it, but because the stage needed the same lights they had used against me. Marco and I chose a weekday when the restaurant's rooms were quieter and the staff could be trusted not to gawk. Rodrigo told me to bring patience and copies. Lisette Patricia told me to bring my face steady and my voice lower than I felt. Marco promised the room. Rodrigo promised the paper trail. Patricia promised to file whatever was necessary the moment the conversation turned evasive. Valeria gladly accepted. She loves the theater of things. Sebastian pretended ignorance. Rocio and Delfina, the sister and mother who had learned the economy of smiling at what benefits them, said yes without the courtesy of curiosity. They thought they were inviting me into another performance.
They thought they were safe. The night I walked back into the restaurant the second time, I wore my garnet sweater, the color of a notebook cover, and of a wine stain I had learned to ignore. Luna, not yet mine, was only a dream then. My heart was heavy with ribs of steel, used for years to hold other people's laughs. Rodrigo sat at a corner table with a folder under his arm. Marco met me at the door with a nod, like a man who knows he has to be both gentle and decisive. Patricia arrived with her bag of quiet, efficient authority and a face that never betrayed surprise. The table was set differently than the night they had planned my embarrassment. There were no delicate folded napkins arranged for theatrical flourish. This time, the plates were ordinary, the light warm and honest. Marco had arranged for a private alcove, a circle of witnesses, in case the performance turned into something ugly. He told the waiter in a whisper to keep the room's attention on him in case the others tried to create a scene. They arrived smiling, rich with their own certainty. Valeria sat with that practiced ease that had once charmed me. Sebastian looked at me as if trying to find the son he once called in the evenings for nothing other than to hear my voice. Rocio made a little show of greeting Marco, as if she'd known him for years. Delfina touched my hand in a way deliciously cool, the way someone might touch porcelain. When the first course came, I watched them move as if watching birds in a pattern I could now read. I had the notebook in my purse. Rodrigo's report was in a folder by my knee. Patricia sat with her legal pad closed but near. I ate slowly. I smelled garlic and lemon and a roast that made my memories of Sunday dinners ache in the kind way grief sometimes aches. After the second course, Marco cleared his throat and asked for the room's attention. The hum of conversation dipped because people are curious when a manager is both solemn and public. He said nothing dramatic. He opened a small binder and laid it on the table. The gesture was simple and precise, the kind of small motion that carries authority because it's measured. "Mrs. Reyes," Marco said, "you are not expected to pay tonight." A ripple of surprise moved across the table.
Valeria's smile narrowed in a way that made the sound in my chest tighten. Sebastian looked as if someone had handed him a photograph he could not recognize. "You are sitting in my restaurant," Marco continued. "And then because people leave small truths unspoken, because sometimes the gentleness of a hand reveals what the other side wanted hidden," he added, "you are also a partner in this restaurant. You have been, quietly, for years." For a second I felt faint, not because of pride, I have never liked the word, but because recognition is odd when it comes as defense. The reveal was not meant to be theatrical.
It was a fact that disarmed the ridiculousness of that first bill and put flame to the absurdity that they believed they could teach me humility by making me pay for a meal I had helped sustain in small ways for years. Valeria tried a laugh that turned into a cough. "That's nice," she said, unnerved, "but that has nothing to do with— It has everything to do with whether you assume I will pay for a dinner set up as a trap," Marco said gently. "But that's not why we're here tonight." He nodded toward me. Rodrigo slid his own binder to the center of the table, and Patricia opened her legal pad. I put my garnet notebook on the table and opened it, the way someone opens an old ledger to read names of a family that has not always been kind. My hand did not shake, because the hand that keeps lists learns not to quake at the sight of numbers. It learns to calculate, to act. "You know how to hold a room, Valeria," I said. I did not raise my voice. I never do when anger burns the most, because there is power in lowering the tone so the other person must lean in. The paper was the first thing I laid out, the notebook, filled with dates and amounts. I read them aloud, not in a dramatic cadence, but as if I were reading receipts at a market stall. The numbers sounded plain, almost sleepy when spoken with honesty. May 12, 10,000. July 3, 25,000. September 2018, deposit for wedding, 40,000. Rodrigo's photographs of receipts and hotel bills slid into sight. There were screenshots of messages I had saved. There were bank transfer confirmations with notes explaining little or nothing. There was the Plan Casa Polanco, carefully reproduced. Rodrigo's photographs of the document that treated my home like a project checklist. Valeria shifted. Her fingers found her glass as if a prop. "If you have something to say it clearly, Senora," she said. Her voice was honey slicked over knife. I read the title from the paper. The room shrank a little around that sentence. Plan Casa Polanco. Those were not the words of accident. They were the wording of someone who expected a result and had scheduled steps to get it. Rodrigo passed around photographs of charges at boutiques and hotel stays. The pattern spelled out itself in the quiet. Small loans, forgotten payments, luxury purchased while the account that had been my cushion had transfers moving out. "You will remember the account," I said. "The one I kept for emergencies. There was about 340,000 pesos there, saved in the years when Arnulfo and I put aside what we could. It is not all gone, but it is not where it should be when transactions for hotel suites and furniture appear and are signed in someone else's name." I kept my voice level. Numbers are unsentimental. They are the testimony that lets indignation be useful. Sebastian's hands closed under the table. He glanced at Valeria as if hoping she would conjure a word that would stop the straight line between the paper and his conscience. She said nothing that could justify what the paper showed. Rocio bit her lips so hard I thought it might bleed. When I finished reading, Patricia spoke for the first time. It was quick and legal in a way that removed melodrama. She outlined options: demand letter, restitution, legal claim for 697,000 pesos. She did not inflate the sum. She read it crisply because the law likes to be exact. A demand, formal, firm, respectful of procedure. She told them the truth all lawyers say plainly, that exposure was the first step, that if the money was not negotiated into a settlement, the legal path would make the story public in filings and testimony, where documents like the Plan Casa Polanco would be read under oath. Valeria's color left her face like page tears. Rocio began to whisper to her. Delfina, who had been composed, looked suddenly very small and very old in the way her hands trembled around her napkin. "Pay the bill," Valeria tried. The same old theater, the same old expectation that shame can be repaid with a card swipe and a reputation smoothed. She was trying to turn the conversation brittle and reduce justice to a spectacle of the poor woman paying for her mistake. Marco folded back his hands and looked at her. "This is not about a dinner," he said. "This is about a paper trail. Nor is this about humiliation. It is about what is true." That was the moment the room changed. People shift when they realize the game is not what they thought. They had expected me to fold, to blush and pay. They had not expected that the woman with a notebook could ask for the lights to be turned on. "I'm not here to destroy you," I said. "I am here to make sure the house my husband and I built is not taken because someone thought it was a project to be realized. You have two choices tonight." I looked at them as if choosing had weight. "You can acknowledge the debt, agree to a payment plan, and vacate my home within 48 hours. Or you can refuse, and we will file a legal demand for 697,000 pesos. Valeria's mouth opened, then closed. Sebastian's eyes were glassy and confused, the way someone is at a crossroads between what is comfortable and what is right. Attacks of the heart do not always come as violence. Sometimes they arrive as too late recognition. Rocio tried to speak, to explain a missing context, but Marco's calm hand cut the knot. "This is not a place for explanations without records," he said. "We are looking at records." They folded, not with grace, but with the constrained, angry shame that has the sound of a car door slammed on a summer afternoon. They left the restaurant in an ungraceful line. Rocio, always the one to try to smooth edges, fumbled for a reason with her words. Delfina looked like a weather vane that had lost its direction. Sebastian's shoulders trembled as if he were carrying something too big for his frame. They did not leave by choice, as much as by the sudden weight of being seen.
The legal path was still open to us. The dinner had not been a verdict, but the dinner had been a turning point. The performance had been the bait, and we had shown that the bait could be turned into evidence. They left the following day. They packed in the way people do when they do not want to be remembered in a house anymore, quickly, with fits and starts. A lamp here, a stack of plates there. They tried to take the couch that had always been theirs by the logic of we were living here, but the couch had been my husband's first great thrift purchase and had seen anniversaries and quiet nights. I watched them load boxes into cars and close trunks on a life I had believed was a family life. The police were never involved. There was no dramatic handcuffing. That would have been theater too. What happened was legal steps, calls to attorneys, negotiation. Patricia sent the demand letter. She asked for the full amount and gave room for negotiation, because lawyers know a battle is best begun with a firm demand and then given space to resolve. They negotiated with the practical greed of people who are used to numbers being bent in their favor. The settlement we reached, not a courtroom victory, but a practical session that kept me whole enough, was 450,000 pesos. It was to be paid in agreed installments, with a down payment and then monthly amounts until satisfied. The agreement also included a clause. They would vacate the house and remove all their belongings, and they would not contest the eviction if it came to that. It was not all that I had hoped for in the early, furious hours of discovery. Lawyers and life teach you to shape hope into achievable demands, but it was just as practical enough to let me sleep more nights. Payments came slowly at first, then with more regularity as the months passed. The first check felt like the sound of a small thing being returned to its place. I did not celebrate. I measured and logged. I allowed myself only one private night to stand in the living room and cry, not for the money, but for what the years had taught me about generosity and how it can become a bridge to being used. Sebastian apologized in a letter the way men sometimes do, with half-truth and all longing. I did not close my door to him forever. He is my son, and a heart that has loved will always have an opening for the child it carried and raised. But apologies without steady actions are thin. I asked for proof that he would cut financial dependence on my home. He started therapy. He stopped telling me, "We'll fix it," and started attending appointments, dealing with the shame and the choices he had made. Valeria moved with Rocio to a small apartment, in a neighborhood she had once declared not to suit her aesthetic. I do not relish that detail. I noted because the arc of people often bends to fit consequences. Delfina avoided my calls, and in time the landline stopped lighting with a small buzz of familiar names.
I did not seek revenge. I sought restitution and dignity. The difference matters. When the settlement was signed, it felt like the end of an account book rather than the start of some triumphant parade. We set the payments into a legal account overseen by Patricia. The total, 450,000 pesos, was the number that allowed me to do things I had been postponing while waiting for justice. A proper repair for the roof, a small trip I had been dreaming about, and the peace of mind that comes when the cushion you built has been repaired a little. With the money arriving in part, I replaced the curtains in the living room with ones that let in the light I like, a soft, pale linen that makes the afternoons feel indulgent. I planted a small herb garden again on the back sill. These are not extravagant acts. They are the ways we tell ourselves we are still the authors of our small sanctuaries. I bought Luna 3 months after the last installment cleared. She is a golden retriever, the kind of dog whose joy is unashamed and immediate. I had never intended to have a dog. The idea had been an impulse on a wet Tuesday when I walked past a shelter and felt a tug I could not explain. Luna sleeps under my desk when I write, and when she lifts her head and looks at me with those soft brown eyes, I feel that the life I rebuilt was worth the effort. She is a living bell that rings me back to the ordinary pleasures I had set aside in the years of fighting and forgiving. Travel came later, as a recompense to the part of me that had not known how to take a long, idle flight. Italy first. I ate gelato on a balcony in Naples and listened to the city sound like a song I had been taught by an old radio. I walked along a canal that smelled of coffee and rain and felt foolishly young. It was not a cure for the years of betrayal, but it was a reintroduction to possibility. And then, because one learns the pattern of one's own life, I opened a channel to tell the story not as a complaint but as a testimony, a practical, honest account of what I had learned about dignity, about money, and about the small surgical power of documentation. At first, only a few people watched the videos. Then more. People wrote in, sharing similar stories. A neighbor who had been drained by an adult child's demands, a woman who had kept a notebook of payments and had used it to protect herself. The channel became less about miraculous revelations and more about ordinary tools, how to document, how to set boundaries, how to seek a lawyer who listens. The will I updated was written with the same careful, pragmatic language that Patricia had used, clauses to protect the house from future opportunism, a clear executor who would honor my wishes without delay, instructions for Luna, and a clause that made it clear that emotional blackmail would not be a path to inheritance. It is not a mean will.
It is simply a will that understands how the world sometimes tries to transfer ownership of what is loved to whoever knows how to make plans. People ask me if I felt vindictive during the restaurant confrontation. Did I savor the moment they were exposed? The honest answer is no. Exposure was not a sport. It was a remedy. There is a difference between enjoying another's humiliation and insisting that truth be acknowledged so the harm stops. Humiliation had been the tool they tried to use against me. My revenge was simple: paperwork, witnesses, law, and a refusal to be small again. Months passed. The house resumed its rhythms. I walked the neighborhood and noticed new details. A bakery that sells sweet rolls the way the world once sold comfort. A child who rides a bike and rings a bell. The jacaranda trees that blossom each spring. The things I had feared losing had names and textures. The sound of the kettle, the smell of tomatoes frying, a photograph of Arnulfo in the kitchen with flour on his shirt. They were back because I had made space for them again. Sometimes I think of the people who sat at that table and their choices. People are complex. Some choices are the result of greed. Some are the result of habit, of a life shaped by the fear of never having enough. The law and the ledger are not moral philosophers. They are blunt instruments that do what they can with facts. I do not pretend to have healed every corner of myself. I still feel the momentum of years when I find a receipt and see his handwriting on the back, a small pause that makes my chest ache. But the ache is clearer now. It is not a fog. It has edges. Friends asked why I chose to stay in the house, why I did not give it up to avoid the pain of memory. I told them that the house held the good too, the smells of a life, the sound of a man whistling in the mornings. To leave would have been to reward the idea that those things could be priced and relocated at someone else's whim. To stay and to set rules was the truest way to honor the years Arnulfo and I kept our lights on. There are lessons I tell people who write to me. Keep records. Trust your sense of discomfort when small things are asked again and again. Consult counsel early, and do not confuse love with the duty to be financially responsible for another adult's choices. I am not saying all debts are selfish, or that forgiveness is not noble. I am saying that generosity without boundaries can be a pathway to theft disguised as family. When I speak about the Plan Casa Polanco, people ask me how I found the courage to read it aloud. The courage was not sudden.
It was a slow accretion of proofs, the notebook, the bank statements, Rodrigo's photographs. Courage is often built by the steady accumulation of small, undeniable truths. It is made of paper and the habit of keeping it. The settlement paid for repairs to the roof and for the small trips I allowed myself.
It also paid for a small fund I created for friends who were elderly and had no one to call. That fund is nothing like the settlement in scale, but it is a moral return to the world, a simple help for someone who needs a plumber or a grocery bag. It was important to me that what I got back be used in a way that widened the circle of dignity. I am not the same woman who would have, 2 years earlier, taken a folder of chicken scratch numbers and shrugged. The lessons the ledger taught me were practical, surgical. The notebook was more than a record. It became a teacher. I learned to value my time, to hold my money like a promise to myself, not as an offering to fill other people's emptiness. When people write and ask whether the humiliation changed me permanently, I answer that it changed me in ways that matter. I am more careful now, less generous with my peace in situations that demand a price I am not willing to pay. I do not mean to sound hard. The world asks for kindness, and the problem is not kindness itself. It is the failure to ask for reciprocity. I ask for reciprocity now. Sometimes at night, when Luna is asleep at my feet and the house makes the small noises of old wood settling, I open the garnet notebook. I do not read it to count old wounds. I read it to remember the order of my life and to see how small, calm steps reshaped a problem into a solution. I have written other things since: grocery lists, a set of recipes I want to teach to a neighbor, a note to leave with Luna should she survive me. I plan for tomorrow in the same way I planned my legal strategy, with care and a stubborn refusal to be erased. If there is one thing I want you to leave with after listening to this, it is not how cleverly I turned their trap against them. It is that dignity is not given, it is protected. You protect it with boundaries, with paper, and with allies who will bear witness. You protect it by refusing to let someone else decide your place at the table. And that is why when someone asks, "What did you gain?" I say, "A roof that felt like mine again, a dog who thinks I am miraculous for throwing a ball, the small pleasure of planting basil in a new pot, friends who stayed when the drama fell away, and the satisfaction of knowing that when the ledger was opened, truth was not embarrassed into silence." If you have sat through a room that assumed you would be the one to pay, if you have kept a small notebook of favors that turned into a debt, write to me. Tell your story. We are quieter in our pain than we should be. And if you want to hear the rest, the small practical things I learned about documenting bank transfers, about what to tell a lawyer, about how to structure a demand letter, subscribe and leave a comment. I read them, everyone. I do not promise to fix your life. I promise to offer what I learned, that patience, paperwork, and silence broken at the right time can return more than money. They can return the right to be seen. They asked me to be there at 8:30, to be the one who would pay, as if humiliation were a currency. They hoped I would blush and slide a card across the table. What they did not expect was that I had been counting. They did not expect that the same hand that writes grocery lists could become the hand that holds a case until justice, practical, procedural, patient, was done. If this story touched you, if you have something to share, leave a comment. If you want to learn how to keep a ledger that can save your dignity, subscribe, and I will tell you exactly what I kept and why. And if you know someone who needs to hear that boundaries are not cruelty, but protection, share this. We build courage together, one paper at a time.